It was a quiet Tuesday morning on Clearwater Ranch, a sprawling piece of land in rural Montana that had belonged to the Morrison family for 3 generations. The sun was just starting to burn through the early morning fog when something unexpected happened. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, came running down the dirt road that led to the ranch's main gate. She was barefoot, her clothes were torn and dirty, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. "Please don't close the gate. Please don't close the gate," she was yelling, her small voice desperate and terrified. The 3 ranch hands who were about to close the large metal gate for the day froze in confusion. They'd never seen this girl before. There were no neighbors for miles. No houses nearby. No explanation for why a child would be running toward them in this condition, screaming about a gate. But what happened next, what they saw when they looked behind the girl, would change everything they thought they knew about the land they'd been working on for years. It would expose a secret that had been hidden in plain sight, and it would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire community. If you love mysteries that keep you on the edge of your seat, if you believe that sometimes the most shocking truths come from the most unexpected sources, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single moment of this incredible story. Like this video if you think children deserve protection and justice. Let's find out what happened. The ranch and the morning. Clearwater Ranch sat on 500 acres of beautiful Montana landscape. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains. A small creek ran through the property during spring and summer. The main house was a large Victorian-style building that had been updated over the years but still maintained its original charm. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, including a stable where horses were kept and a large storage facility for equipment. The ranch had been owned by the Morrison family since 1962. Thomas Morrison, now 78 years old, had inherited it from his father and had run it successfully for nearly 50 years. He raised cattle, kept horses, and maintained the property with a small crew of ranch hands who lived on or near the property. On this particular Tuesday morning, Thomas was still inside the main house having breakfast with his wife, Margaret. Outside, 3 of his ranch hands, Marcus, David, and Juan, were performing their regular morning duties. One of those duties was to close the large metal gate that marked the entrance to the property at 8 a.m. sharp. This was routine, part of the regular schedule they'd followed for years. Close the gate in the morning. Open it at 7 a.m. for deliveries or if the owner needed to go into town. Marcus was the oldest of the 3, a man in his 60s who'd worked on the ranch for 30 years. He was trusted completely by Thomas Morrison. David was in his 40s, a quiet man who preferred the company of horses to people. Juan was the youngest, just turned 30, and he was ambitious about eventually becoming a manager on the ranch. As Marcus reached for the large gate handle, preparing to swing it closed, something made him pause. He'd heard something, a sound that didn't belong on the quiet ranch. It sounded like running footsteps and someone yelling, "The girl appears." The little girl burst through the fog on the dirt road that led to the ranch. She was running as fast as her small legs could carry her, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Her light blue dress was torn at the hem and stained with dirt and what looked like blood. Her bare feet were bleeding from running on the rough dirt road. Her hair was matted and tangled. Her eyes were wide with pure terror. "Please don't close the gate," she screamed, her voice high and desperate. Please don't close it." The 3 men stood frozen, not understanding what they were seeing. This wasn't just a lost child. This was a child in danger. A child fleeing from something. Hey, it's okay," Marcus called out, his voice gentle and concerned. He stepped away from the gate and moved toward the approaching girl. "We're not closing it. It's okay. You're safe now." The girl reached the gate and immediately grabbed the metal bars, breathing hard, looking back over her shoulder at the foggy road behind her. Her whole body was shaking. She was crying, though it seemed like tears came from a place deeper than just physical fear. "I'm sorry," she said between gasps for breath. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. He told me if I left, he'd hurt the animals. But I had to. I had to get out." Juan stepped forward. "What's your name? Where did you come from?" He pointed down the road. "There's nothing down that way for miles." The girl looked at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "My name is Emma," she whispered. And I came from the property behind your ranch. The one everyone says is empty. But it's not empty. There's people there. And he won't let them leave. # the realization. Marcus felt something cold run down his spine. He'd lived in this rural community his entire life. He knew the land. He knew that there was indeed a property adjacent to the Morrison Ranch, about 200 acres that had been purchased by someone from out of state about 18 months ago. The owner had put up a high fence and posted no trespassing signs all around it. Local people had speculated about what he was doing with the land, but nobody had gotten close enough to know for certain. Thomas Morrison had mentioned once, months ago, that it seemed odd that someone would buy property out here and never be seen. But nobody thought much about it. Rural Montana had plenty of people who wanted privacy, people who wanted to be left alone. But now, looking at this small girl who appeared to have been kept prisoner, everything suddenly made terrible sense. "Emma," Marcus said softly, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. "You're safe now. I promise. Can you tell us what's happening? Who won't let the people leave?" Emma's whole body began to shake more violently. "His name is Richard," she said. "He's the man who owns the place. He brought us there. Me and my mom and other people. He said it was a community, but it's not. It's a prison. He locks the gates at night. He watches everything. He has guns. And he gets angry if anyone tries to leave." David had already pulled out his phone to call the police. This was beyond their ability to handle. This was something that needed authorities. The phone call and the first response. The sheriff's office received the call at 8:17 a.m. The dispatcher immediately understood the severity of the situation and began coordinating with state police and federal authorities. A child in danger. A potential illegal compound. Possible kidnapping and imprisonment. This required immediate, careful, professional response. Within 30 minutes, law enforcement vehicles began arriving at Clearwater Ranch. Sheriff Tom Bradley, who'd been in the sheriff's office for 23 years, took personal charge of the situation. He'd never dealt with anything like this before. Most of his job involved traffic violations, stolen equipment, and the occasional domestic dispute. This was different. This was serious. Emma was taken to a secure room in the ranch house, where she was given clean clothes, first aid for her feet, and water. A victim advocate who specialized in working with traumatized children was brought in to gently interview Emma and get information about what was happening at the compound behind the ranch. What emerged over the next hour was a disturbing picture. Richard Hammond had purchased the property using cash and had been slowly building a compound. He'd started with his immediate family, but through social media and online recruiting, he'd attracted followers who believed in his philosophy, which appeared to be a mix of conspiracy theories, distrust of government, and authoritarian control. Emma's mother had been recruited through Facebook, where Richard had targeted people who expressed anxiety about the government or who seemed isolated and vulnerable. He'd promised her a place where she and her daughter could be part of a true community, away from the corrupting influences of the outside world. When she'd realized what was actually happening, that she and her daughter were essentially prisoners, it was too late. Richard controlled the property. He controlled access. He controlled information. Emma had finally escaped by squeezing through a gap in the fence that the other children had been secretly working on for weeks. She'd run toward the nearest neighboring property, which happened to be Clearwater Ranch. The compound is discovered. By early afternoon, a team of law enforcement officers had positioned themselves around Richard Hammond's property. They established a perimeter and made contact with Hammond through a loudspeaker, requesting that he and all residents exit the property peacefully. Hammond's response was to refuse and to barricade himself inside the main building with approximately 40 people, including at least 15 children. What followed was a tense standoff that lasted for 18 hours. Negotiators worked to establish communication with Hammond. The FBI's crisis negotiation team was called in. State police surrounded the property. The local community watched in shock as the reality of what had been hidden in their backyard became undeniable. Richard Hammond was a man in his 50s who'd become obsessed with control and ideology. He'd convinced his followers that the government was coming for them, that they needed to isolate and prepare. He'd used psychological manipulation to keep people in line. He'd separated parents and children strategically to maintain control. He'd created an environment where escape seemed impossible and resistance seemed futile. For the people inside, particularly the children, the standoff must have felt terrifying. They'd been told by Richard that police were the enemy, that law enforcement was there to arrest them, that they needed to resist. Some of the residents had started to believe this narrative so deeply that they were willing to defend the compound. Emma, watching from the safety of the ranch house, was devastated. "My mom is in there," she kept saying. "Is she okay? Will she come out?" The victim advocate kept reassuring her, but nobody could know for certain what would happen until this standoff was resolved. The breakthrough. At around 2 a.m., after hours of negotiation, the first residents began to exit the compound. A woman with 3 children came out first, followed by several others. Slowly, the residents began to leave, choosing trust in law enforcement over loyalty to Richard Hammond. By dawn, most of the residents had exited peacefully. Richard Hammond attempted to barricade himself inside with a few remaining followers, but law enforcement made the decision to enter and secure the building. Hammond was found in an office with weapons and ammunition, surrounded by documents revealing the extent of his manipulation and control. Emma's mother, Sarah, was found in one of the residential buildings. When she saw her daughter being held safely by the victim advocate, she collapsed to her knees weeping. The reunion of mother and daughter, captured by news cameras that had descended on the scene, became the emotional centerpiece of the entire incident. "I'm so sorry," Sarah kept saying to her daughter. "I'm so sorry. I should never have brought us there. I'm sorry." Emma, despite everything she'd endured, was trying to comfort her mother. "You didn't know," she said with a wisdom that no 7-year-old should have to possess. "He tricked you. But we're out now. We're safe now." The investigation and justice. Over the following weeks and months, law enforcement conducted a thorough investigation of Richard Hammond's compound. What they discovered was worse than anyone had initially understood. Hammond had been physically and psychologically abusing residents. He'd been holding them prisoner through a combination of isolation, manipulation, and threats. He'd been financially exploiting them, taking their money and valuables under the guise of community contribution. He'd been separating families and using the threat of family separation to control behavior. The children in the compound had been subjected to a form of psychological abuse that experts called coercive control. They'd been taught to view the outside world as dangerous and Hammond as their savior. They'd been monitored constantly. They'd been prevented from having normal childhoods. Richard Hammond was charged with numerous federal crimes including unlawful imprisonment, child abuse, extortion, and conspiracy. Other members of his inner circle who'd helped him maintain control over residents were also charged. The legal process would take years, but justice was being pursued systematically. The residents who'd been rescued began a long process of recovery. Many of them had experienced trauma that would take years to process. Some had children who'd been born in the compound and had never known any other life. Therapists, social workers, and victim advocates worked with each resident to help them readjust to normal life and begin healing. The community response. The Morrison family and the 3 ranch hands who'd been at the gate that morning became local heroes. Emma had made a split-second decision to run toward them, and they'd responded with compassion and immediate action. Their willingness to call police rather than dismiss Emma's story had set everything in motion. If Marcus had closed that gate just 30 seconds earlier, Sheriff Bradley said in an interview weeks later, Emma wouldn't have made it through. She'd be back in that compound, and we might never have known what was happening there. One little girl's courage and the quick thinking of these ranch workers literally changed the outcome of this entire situation. The community rallied around the rescued residents. Local churches offered counseling and support. Businesses donated supplies. The high school organized fundraisers to help residents who'd lost everything or who'd had their money stolen by Hammond. The community understood that these people were victims, and they deserved help rebuilding their lives. The transformation of Emma and her mother. Emma's mother, Sarah, had to confront the difficult reality that she'd made a terrible mistake in judgment. She'd been vulnerable, lonely, anxious about the state of the world, and Richard Hammond had exploited that vulnerability perfectly. Coming to terms with that was part of her healing process. But Sarah was determined that her experience would mean something. She began working with other residents to establish a support group for people who'd been in the compound. She spoke with police about warning signs that might help people identify manipulative groups. She worked with schools to educate young people about coercive control and manipulation. Emma, despite her young age, understood that she'd done something important. She'd been brave. She'd risked going back into danger to save others. The therapists working with her used her own strength and courage as building blocks for her recovery. Rather than letting her trauma define her, they helped her understand that she was someone who'd survived something difficult and had made a difference. A year after her escape, Emma was interviewed for a documentary about the compound. The filmmakers were careful not to re-traumatize her, but they wanted to tell the story of how a child's courage had exposed a danger hidden in a rural community. Emma spoke quietly but clearly about what had happened, about how she'd known something wasn't right, about how she'd made the decision to run. "I didn't know if running would work," Emma said in the documentary. "I just knew that staying wasn't okay. And I had to try to help my mom and the other people who were stuck there. Running to the gate was scary, but staying was scarier." What this story teaches us. Emma's story teaches several important lessons about safety, community, and the importance of listening to children. First, about hidden dangers. Communities often have dangers hiding in plain sight. We assume that something bad can't be happening near us because we haven't seen it. But predators and manipulative people often count on that invisibility. Richard Hammond was operating a compound right next to a well-known ranch, and nobody knew what was really happening there for 18 months. That's how skilled he was at manipulation and isolation. Second, about trusting children. When a child tells you something unusual or frightening, we should listen. Emma's story seemed impossible at first. A compound of prisoners hidden in rural Montana? But the ranch hands believed her. They didn't dismiss her because she was young or because her story seemed unbelievable. That's what saved lives. Third, about community responsibility. The Morrison family, the ranch hands, and eventually the entire community understood that what happened to those 40 people was their responsibility too. When something harmful is happening in your community, it affects everyone. The appropriate response is to help, to investigate, and to support victims. Fourth, about the power of courage. A 7-year-old girl's decision to run toward an uncertain future rather than accept her current situation required incredible courage. Children are often much braver than we give them credit for. Emma's courage inspired the community. It showed that even in the most difficult situations, resistance is possible. Fifth, about healing and recovery. The story doesn't end with rescue. Recovery is long and difficult, but it's possible. The residents of the compound, including Emma and her mother, have the opportunity to rebuild their lives, to process their trauma, and to move forward. That process requires professional help, community support, and time. But it's possible. The lasting impact. 5 years after the discovery of the compound, Clearwater Ranch commissioned a small monument near the gate where Emma had run through. The monument is simple, a stone with an inscription that reads, "Here a child found courage. Here a community found compassion. Here justice was served." It's become a gathering place for the community. Every year on the anniversary of Emma's escape, residents gather there to remember the event and to celebrate the resilience of the survivors. Emma is now 12 years old and thriving in school. She's in the Gifted program, showing a particular interest in social work and victim advocacy. She wants to help other children who've experienced trauma and manipulation. She's turned her own experience into motivation to help others. Her mother, Sarah, works as a counselor at the local high school, helping students identify manipulative relationships and coercive control. She speaks to parent groups about how predators target vulnerable people and how to protect yourself and your family. She's transformed her pain into purpose. The 3 ranch hands who found Emma that morning, Marcus, David, and Juan, became local heroes. Marcus was even named Community Member of the Year by the county commissioners. But none of them saw themselves as heroes. They simply saw a child in danger and did what any decent person would do. The message for today. Emma's story reminds us that safety requires vigilance. It reminds us that we need to listen to children and take their reports seriously. It reminds us that communities are safer when people look out for each other and when we're willing to report concerns to authorities. It also reminds us that children are resilient, that trauma can be healed, that with proper support, people who've experienced terrible things can rebuild their lives and even turn their experiences into strength. Most importantly, it reminds us that one person's courage can change everything. Emma was 7 years old. She was small and vulnerable and living in a controlled environment. But she made a decision to run, and that decision exposed a criminal operation, freed 40 people, and set a community on a path toward healing. We all have the potential to be like Emma, to recognize when something is wrong and to take action. We all have the potential to be like Marcus, David, and Juan, to respond with compassion and good sense when someone needs help. We all have the potential to be like the community that rallied around the survivors, to recognize that when one person is hurt, we all have a responsibility to help. # Bullseye final message and call to action. Emma's story could have ended in tragedy. If the gate had been closed just 30 seconds earlier, she might not have escaped. If the ranch hands had dismissed her as confused or delusional, they might not have called police. If the community had blamed the victims for joining the compound, they might not have received support. But because people chose compassion, because they listened to a child, because they took action, a terrible situation was stopped and lives were saved. That matters. That shows what's possible when we choose to do the right thing, even when it's inconvenient or difficult. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own community and the importance of protecting children, please like this video. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss stories about courage, community, and justice. We bring you real stories about real people who faced incredible circumstances. Share this story with someone who works with children, teachers, counselors, coaches, family members. Children's safety depends on adults who listen, who believe them, and who take action. Emma's story could inspire someone to recognize signs of abuse or manipulation that they might otherwise have missed. Most importantly, remember that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a 7-year-old girl running toward an uncertain future. Sometimes it's ranch workers making a phone call instead of dismissing a strange story. Sometimes it's a community choosing compassion over judgment. If you see something that concerns you, trust your instincts. Report it to authorities. Believe children when they tell you something is wrong. These simple actions can literally save lives. Thank you for watching. Hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel. And remember, our communities are only as safe as we make them. Let's all be part of making them safe. We'll be back with more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about communities standing together, and about the power of listening and believing. Until next time, stay alert, stay compassionate, and stay ready to help.